For Country Viewpoint, we've got Andrew Partridge again with us from Michell Wool. Andrew, looks like a pretty steady as she goes kind of week on the wool market.
It's sort of 2 weeks in a row, Ricky. You're right. EMI unchanged at 1,342 for the week. Pretty minor movements amongst the indicators, sort of +5 here, 10 there, and -5 or 10 here and there. But probably a little bit in the finer microns because of the irregular sort of wools coming onto the market. There's a bit of fluctuations in the indicators in that sort of 17.5 AWEX closed them off sort of 30 cents, but it's really got to do with selection because there's terrific demand still for the better types.
Yeah, what's going on there though if the market stayed relatively flat when Freo wasn't part of the offering this week?
Yeah, correct. So they didn't have enough wool over there. We just sold on the East Coast, under 40,000 bales, and I think eventually we only sold sort of 30-odd thousand bales. So with the market not reacting to the slower volume or lower volumes, we've just got to be a little bit cautious about where this market's heading to. It's a very similar pattern when you look to the previous year. The market, more often than not, sort of seems to drop in those early sort of spring markets and then sort of picks up later on in the year. So we've got a bit of currency wind against us. It's a bit stronger. So, yeah, just a sort of a bit of a flat period at the moment.
Now, it's a bit tricky to speculate on this, but there was, I think, maybe you said, but I know someone, I think Wool Producers Australia CEO Joe Hall said a little while back, there was a bit of nervousness about demand when it came to the Northern Hemisphere and maybe even here as well when it comes to wool products and clothing, and people are just nervous about, I guess, inflation. Is that possibly what we're seeing here on the buying side in wool?
I think so, Ricky. Yeah, I think so. We can't underestimate the poor old Chinese consumer at the moment with the COVID zero policy. Their confidence is absolutely being sapped. So the businesses don't know when they can start doing orders, and particularly for the consumers who aren't buying. And so there's a real lull, a lot of pessimism coming out of that domestic sort of Chinese market. And they buy a lot of our wool, particularly, we can blame the bit of the crossbred price, to be honest, on them, because they buy 80, probably 90% of our crossbred wool, and then you've got a country that's COVID zero and their consumption's been knocked about because people can't do normal business. It's got to affect price, doesn't it?
Well, I suspect so. Is that related to this comment I see in a report here about the oddment sector was the strongest performer for the week? What's going on there?
Yeah, so we're doing plenty of business, probably the last 2 or 3 months, and cartings in history they're a slow reactor. They sort of don't bob up and down, and we don't have these dramatic changes like the fleece market does, the combing market does. So carting has a sort of, generally business is written in months out, so 6, 8 and 10 weeks time is quite often how they write business. When we write merino business, it's more sort of hand to mouth, so we have only 3 or 4 weeks to buy. So we do have more volatility in the longer wools. Carting market sort of gently sort of bumbles along, and it had a bit of a correction there, if you remember, a couple of weeks ago. Indicator coming off quite a bit, and now it sort of seems to be hitting a bit of a level. And if you look at the graph again there now, the indicator, carting indicator sitting at 850. It's a bit of a lull. It should be getting support at this level.
But do we also see, I can only see from a year back, but do we also tend to see around this time of year, once we spit out, the amount of wool sitting around after the recess, a bit of a holding back of the wool, and then it starts to climb sort of about 6 months' time? Correct.
Yeah. Again, it's a bit of a tricky time, obviously, for farmers. A lot of farmers probably haven't got a lot of income this time of year. They're paying more bills and actually selling more than selling products. So wool, for those guys, are fortunate enough who have been able to hound a bit of wool, back in that sort of autumn period. They're now maybe trying to think about selling it now. The offerings are sort of next couple of weeks are actually a little bit higher than the same time last year. So maybe some of those held wools are coming onto the market now to get a bit of cash flow happening in those farms. And of course, the foot and mouth have still got that bit of pessimism around for that as well.
All right, we'll catch up with you next week, Andrew, just about exactly how it's moving, whether we're seeing a bit of traction in the market. But thanks for your report today and have a great weekend.
Cheers, you too.